In this lecture, we'll discuss random numbers, strings, and text files, how we can create a text file, how we can read data from a text file, and how we can write to text files. Let's start with the review quiz. Last time, we discussed lists and dictionaries as new data structures in Python. For lists, we always see a square bracket, and for dictionaries, we see curly braces. List organizes the data by position, so it's a sequence of items, and dictionaries organize data by association. So we have keys and then their values. That being said, the question is, assume that the variable info refers to this dictionary, name and age. The expression list info.keys evaluates to which option? Okay, so we have a list which has two keys and one value for each. And here we see info.keys, which extract the key in the keys in our dictionary, and also we see list. So when we apply list, it makes the data structure a list. So we expect to see square brackets. So info keys, we have two keys, name and age, which are a list. So here the right answer is B. Because always we use a square bracket for list as a data structure. Okay. Now here, I have an exercise for you that we will be discussing this in our live sessions. I would like for you to give it a try and write a program for this. You can see the steps for calculating the greatest common divisor. So as you can see here, we have two positive integers, a and b. And the greatest common divisor of these two integers is the largest number that can be evenly divided into both of them. Here we are using Euclid's algorithm to find the greatest common divisor. And you can see the steps here, three main steps. First, compute the remainder of dividing the large number by the small number. Then replace the large number with the smaller number and the smaller number with the remainder. We repeat this process until the smaller number is 0. So you can see the keyword repeat. So we expect to have a for loop or while loop. We are also updating the values for some variables. The larger number at this point is the greatest common divisor. So we have a termination condition until the smaller number is 0. Now the question is, write a program that lets the user enter two integers. So we are going to have two input statements and then print each step in the process of using the Euclidean algorithm to find the greatest common divisor. Okay. So we want to show the output using the print statements. We have a loop, and we should decide if a for loop is appropriate here or a while loop, and then we can test the program with several numbers to see if it is working or not. Okay. So we will discuss this in our live session, and I encourage you to try to code this. Okay. Now we start chapter 4 of our first textbook, Fundamentals of Python. In this chapter, we learn how to generate random numbers, how to access individual characters in a string, and search for a substring in a string. We also discuss text files. Text files in Python are treated as an object. So we learn how to open a text file for output and write strings or numbers to the file. We also open a text file for input and read strings or numbers from the text file. Sometimes we want to save the result of our algorithm in a text file, or sometimes we need to read inputs from a text file. Okay. Let's start with generating random numbers. Programming languages include resources for generating random numbers. There is a module called random which supports several ways to do this. So we import random as a new module. There is a function randint which returns random number from among numbers between two arguments included. So there is an upper bound, lower bound, and then it returns random number between those two numbers. Okay, here you can see a simple example. We first import the library or the module, and then we want to generate 10 random numbers between 1 and 6. So let's try implement this in a notebook file. Okay. So first we import random, then we have a for loop. After for, we expect a variable. For roll in range, you can go with another variable. We want to repeat this 10 times, and we want to show the result. Random.randint. This is the function which generates integer random number between 1 and 6. When you run this, then you see 10 numbers all between 1 and 6, randomly generated. Okay. And here we have an interesting example, which is a simple game. We are using a random module, and we want to ask a user to enter two numbers, and then we randomly generate a number between the given numbers by the user, and then we ask the user to enter their guess, and we guide them with some messages like it's too small, it's too large, and eventually we will count how many times it takes to guess the right number. Okay, let's try to implement this. First, we import random because we are randomly generating a number. So we are going to ask the user to enter two numbers, so we'll see two input statements. And let's say I make the data structure an integer, and then with this message, enter the smaller number. Okay. Then another variable, call it larger, again an integer number, input a statement, enter the larger number. Now I define another variable, I call it my number, which is a random number between the smaller and larger numbers. So random.randint between a smaller and larger. Now we want to ask the user to enter their guess. So I'm going to have a while loop. First, I initialize the variable count because I want to count how many times it takes for our user to guess the number. And then here I'm using while true. So you have seen this format for while loop before. When we have while true, we need to see a break. Otherwise, we run into infinite loops. Okay. While true count, augmented assignment, I define another variable called user number. Data structure is an integer. Input a statement. Enter your guess. Now here we have conditional statement. If user number is less than the randomly generated number, which is my number, colon, print to a small. We are guiding the user. Else if user number larger than my number, which is a randomly generated one, print too large. Else, colon, print, congratulations. You have got it in we show variable count because it shows how many times the user go through the while loop. Then tries. And remember, we need to have a break statement here. Otherwise, it never stops because we have while true. Okay, let's run this. Enter the smaller number, for example, 7. Enter the larger number, let's say 12. Now enter your guess. I would go with 8. It's too small. We can go with 10. Too small. Then 11. Too small. 12. Now congratulations, you have got it in 4 tries. So the generated number was 12 and we got it in 4 tries. Okay, this was a good practice which had random number generation, a while loop, and also selection statements. Remember, from a statistic, we have different probability distributions and we can generate random numbers from those distributions. Stats.distribution.random variables generates random numbers from the specified distribution. For example, it can be uniform distribution, normal distribution, or exponential distribution. The argument to RVS or random variables will vary depending on the type of the distribution you are working with. Here is an example. Import SciencePython library.stat as stats. So this is a new library that we haven't discussed so far, but we will discuss it in details later on. But this one just shows you an example and also a plot, so you can see what we are going to discuss under statistical functions and visualization. So I generate a uniform data, so stats.uniform random variables, and we know that for uniform distributions we need 2 parameters, lower bound and upper bound. So with size, I specify how many random numbers you want to generate, let's say 20, between 0 and 10, and then you can apply len function to count the number of items. And then you can print it, and we import this library, matplot library, that we use a lot for data visualization. Then we apply plot function. It's like a scatter plot, and then we see what it looks like. Okay. An example here. I have already run this piece of code. So you can see it generates 20 random numbers between 0 and 10, all of them between 0 and 10. And then we plot them. So on x-axis, you can see the number of observations, and on y value, you can see their values, which is between 0 and 10. So this was an example just to show you that we can generate random numbers from different probability distribution. Stay tuned. We will discuss it later on in details. Okay. Now we can move on to strings. If you remember, the first three data structure we discussed in this course were integer, double or float, fractional values, and strings. So a string is a data structure, consists of smaller pieces of data, character, and a string length is the number of characters it contains. We can apply the len function, which returns the string length, which is the number of characters. Here you can see an example. We have a string and it's high there, and if we apply len function, it counts the number of characters, and then we see 9. Here's also an example that we assign it to a variable, this string, and then we have a for loop, and we want to go through all characters, identify its position index, and see its value. Okay, let's try to run this and see what it looks like in Notebook. Data equal to a string, high there, and then we have a for loop, index in range. So range expect an integer number, so we apply len function, which returns the number of characters in data, and then print index and its value, data index. Now let's run this. Okay. So you can see the index or position for each character. By default, it starts from 0, and it's the value or the character is H, I. We also have a space, and the last one is the exclamation mark. Okay. So we can apply the len function and for loops for strings as well. Now we want to discuss substrings. So we want to traverse a list of file names in this example, and find the file names that have .txt extension. It means that we are looking for specific characters in strings. As you can see in this example, we have a list. It has 3 items, and they are all strings because we see quotation marks. And then we define a for loop to go through all items in the list. And if the txt extension exists in each item, then we print the name or the items that we have in the list. Okay, let's try to implement this quickly. File list, it is a list, so we see a square bracket myfile.txt. The other one is myprogram.exe, and then the other one is yourfile.py. file.txt. So we know that we have two items with txt file extension. Now I define a for loop for L in file list colon if this substring, which is .txt in L, then print L. Let's run this. So we see two items, my file.txt and your file.txt. So we look for a substring and then we print them. Another example, if we want to extract a file's name extension, we can apply a split function. So we worked with a split before. So it splits the characters. So here we want to split them from the dot point, for example. So you will see my file and then a split. The next item would be txt. Okay. So when we want to split them, we need to specify how we want to split them. A split by a space, a split by dot, or a split by t. So if it finds t, then split your strings from there. So let's try to implement this and see what it looks like. So I have this string, my file.txt. I apply a split function, split them by dot, we run it. And then you can see you have a list with two items, my file, split, and then txt. Another example, let's say my file.py it's a Python file. We split it again. By dot. Now you can see my file, the first item, and then py, the second item in your list. Okay. So we can use the in operator to find a substring, or we can split them and extract the extension or extract the substring we are looking for. Okay. So so far we played with the different strings. We applied a split method, so we search for substrings. Now we want to create a text file, and this one is very useful because we usually read data from an Excel sheet or a text file, and eventually we want to save the result of our program in a text file, right? So data can be output to a text file using a file object. So we need to create a file, and that becomes an object in Python. There are three main steps, as you can see in this slide. First, we need to open a file for output. The built-in statement is open, and then the name of the file. The second argument, we need to specify we are in a writing mode or reading mode. If we want to save, then we are in writing mode. And then I define a variable. Then that variable becomes my object, my file. Open my file.txt, and we are in writing mode. So if file doesn't exist, it is created. So you are going to see my file.txt. If it already exists, Python opens it when data are written to the file and the file is closed. Any data previously existing in the file are erased. So you override it with new data. Now this statement, after you open and create your file, this statement writes 2 lines of text. Now you want to write something. So I call the variable for my file here f. You can go with other variable names. So f.write. Write is the function. So now we are writing some inputs. And the input is a string here. First line, backward / go to the next line, and then second line. Okay. So we expect to see 2 lines of text. Here's the important part. In the third step, we need to close it. We need to close the file. Otherwise, the results are not going to save. So when all outputs are finished, close the file. Okay. Now let's try to run this. I define a variable f, open, pay attention to color. It's a reserved word, so it's green. Now my file name, let's say, is my file.txt, and we are in writing mode. Now I want to write 2 lines of text, so f.write. First line, then backward /n means that you go to the next line, and then second line dot go to the next line, and the third step is to close it. Okay. We run this, and then if you go to the home page, we should find a file named myfile.txt. And here's the file that we just created. If you click on it, then you will see 2 lines of text, first line and the second line, and I see a typo here. So it created this text file, and then we were in writing mode, and we saved some information. So that's how we write text to a file. We can also write numbers to a file, which is the example here. This code segment that illustrates the output of integers to a text file. In this example, we want to generate random numbers. Let's say 500 random numbers. We use the randint function that we discussed in the beginning. And then we want to save it in a Word file. Okay. And here, when I'm using the write function, I'm changing the data structure. I'm making them a string. Okay, so they look like a number, but their data structure is a string. Plus backward /n. It means that I want to see 1 number in each line. So let's try to implement this, and you can see what it looks like. First, we import random module. We create a file with open. I name the file integers.txt. We are in writing mode. And now I want to generate 500 numbers, so I can go with a for loop for count in range 500, colon, define a variable, which is a random number, using the randint function between 1 and 500, let's say. And then we want to save it in our file, so f.write. Okay, here I'm changing the data structure. I'm making them a string number plus backward /n. So 1 number per line. After we are done with writing all numbers, then we need to close it. So f.close. Okay, let's run this. Okay, we expect to see a new file, integers.txt, and home page. Okay, if you click on it, then you can see you have 500 random variables, all between 1 and 500, and 1 number per line. And that's how you save the result in a text file. We can also read numbers from a file. So far we discussed the writing mode. Now we are discussing the reading mode. In Python, a string representation of integers and floating point numbers can be converted to numbers by using the functions int and float. So these are the main data structure we discussed. Int make everything integers and float make everything double. So fractional values are acceptable. And str makes everything a string. Okay. So in this example, we want to open the integers.txt file that we just created in the previous slide. Now we are in reading mode. Now we want to, we generated 500 numbers. Now we want to add them up. So I define a variable, I initialize it, and define a for loop which goes through all lines. I make them integer because if I want to add them up, they should be number. I cannot add up strings. So I change the data structure to int, and then I add them up here with augmented assignment, and eventually print the summation. So let's try to implement this one. So now we want to open a file which already exists, integers.txt. We are in reading mode. Okay. I initialize my variable, the sum equal to 0. We initialize usually outside of the for loop. And now for line, you can go with any other variable after for. For line and if, I'm applying the strip function, which removes all white spaces because we are dealing with strings. We want to make sure that we get rid of white spaces and we just keep the numbers. Okay. And then number is integer. We make them integer. Line. And then we use augmented assignment. We add them up. And eventually we print the sum is the value for this variable. Okay, let's run this. We see a syntax error. Okay, we fixed it. Now we have the summation. So the sum is this number. So I opened the text file in reading mode. I wrote a for loop to go through all lines. We applied the strip function to get rid of white spaces. We usually do this when we are dealing with strings. Then we make them a number, and then we can add them up. If you would like to try this, let's get rid of the integer and see the error that you get because the numbers were a string. Even though they look like numbers, but their data structure is a string and we cannot add them up. Now, another question becomes how to read numbers from Excel sheets, right? Oftentimes we have Excel sheets and we have different sheets. We want to get access to each sheet and then the columns, and we want to read from them. So we are going to discuss this in the next lecture. So stay tuned. In summary, we discussed random.randint, which returns a random number between two numbers, lower bound and upper bound. A string is a sequence of 0 or more characters. So we played with a few variables whose data structure is a string. We use in operator, which is used to detect the presence or absence of a substring in a string. So we wanted to find .txt in that example. We also learned about the text files. So text file is a software object that allows a program to transfer data to and from permanent storage. We worked with some useful methods, read and write, and read lines. So we didn't discuss read lines, but read lines return all lines in the file as a list, where each line is an item in the list. So if you want to store everything as a list, so you use the read lines. And this is the end of this lecture.